Hi, I'm Teri Hart, and this is The Heart of It All, a podcast about navigating the realities of caregiving. Today's episode is super special to me. On every fourth episode of The Heart of It All, I am inviting a person who is currently or has been in the caregiving role. Every experience is unique, and the best way we can learn is from each other. So settle in for an emotional chat with my friend Pay Chen and I as we talk about her caretaking role with her dad. And here's what I know I wanted to do with this podcast, The Heart of It All. I wanted people to be seen and heard. The wide variety of experiences of the caretaking role are never ending. The challenges, of course, but also the blessings that come from being able to take care of people we love and how we can best be prepared to do so. My friend Pay Chen lost her dad March 29th, 2022. Pay and I have known each other for a really long time. We've made TV together, laughed a lot together. And frankly, I've been a fan of hers since watching her do the intros on Omni TV before the David Letterman show. She was so good. She's really smart. She's really, really funny. And she has an empathy that is unmatched. Pay is also super private. She did write on social media super beautifully about her dad's life and also his death. But Pay kept a lot of that in between time of diagnosis and of caretaking to herself. So I knew this was a big ask. I am so very grateful to Pay for being my very first guest to talk about her personal experience with caretaking. Pay Chen is a Toronto-based food and travel writer, media personality, and culinary innovator known for her captivating storytelling and authentic voice. Born in Taiwan and raised in Nova Scotia, Pay draws from a rich multicultural background that informs her explorations of global cuisines. She regularly appears as a guest expert and contributor on major Canadian TV and radio programs, including Breakfast Television and The Good Stuff with Mary Berg, where she shares insights on food culture, trends, and recipes. In addition to her media presence, Pay is a published writer featured in outlets such as Chatelaine, Toronto Life, and the Globe and Mail. She co-created Sacha Ish, a miso-based condiment blending East Asian flavors with a modern twist, and I'm telling you, it is delicious. Get your hands on that. Pay continues to inspire and educate audiences about the rich stories behind the food we enjoy. She's also very, very funny, a great friend to many, and is a tireless volunteer at many organizations. Firstly, thanks so much for being here, Pay. We both said that it'll be a miracle if we get through this without tears. So let me get this off the table. I am still very, very sorry for the loss of your dad, which was March 29th, 2022. In my experience, it doesn't go away. It just kind of shifts. So thanks for being here.
Glad to be here. I didn't really want to talk about it, but also we've talked about it so much with each other.
Yeah, we have. I mean, you were such a great sounding board for me and support for me when my dad died. And as I told you, I was so touched reading things that you did share about your dad. He was diagnosed with early dementia and cancer. And with that diagnosis, what were some of the immediate steps that you took?
So it was challenging because my dad was diagnosed sort of like during the pandemic with the early dementia. So I would say he should have been diagnosed much sooner. So we knew that he had early dementia, and that was challenging kind of to navigate on its own. And then he got the cancer diagnosis in October, like the fall before he passed. And I mean, it was just, we were just told, there would be a few months. So it was really hard to process because you're hit with the information, which is obviously very shocking. Like, I think a cancer diagnosis for anyone is extremely shocking. And then you're pretty much told, like, there isn't a treatment option because colon cancer had just spread everywhere. And then you have to process being told, like, well, actually, no, like, you are dying. You need to make plans now. Like, there's no, let's enjoy things while it's good, or let's do another trip. Let's travel across the country to see your grandkids. Like, that wasn't an option. So it's this like crazy fight or flight kind of feeling. It's an incredible amount to process when you haven't dealt with, the healthcare system in that way before, and just not knowing what to do. Like, really just like kind of having no clue. And you're thinking like, well, what does this mean? Like, I don't know what it means for someone to die slowly. I don't know what that means physically for them. What do they need? Is he supposed to be somewhere? Is he in pain? Like all of those things. So, there are resources out there, obviously, but you really have to ask a lot of questions. And it's also really hard because, I just have my brother and my mom. Like we don't have other family in North America. We have extended family in Taiwan. So we don't have other family to fall back on. And my mom, understandably was just like really in shock. And I think a big part of that is like, well, this can't be a real diagnosis. Like he can't really be dying right now. Like there must be some sort of treatment. Like there's got to be a something, right? And then everybody starts giving you advice. So, you get the other family members and stuff are like, well, why would you not do anything? Right? Like why, you should, I had cousins in Taiwan who were like, he should come to Taiwan. I'll make sure he gets the best care and like he can have radiation and like all the stuff. And it's like, and I was the one saying, no, he cannot physically go through that and we're not buying time. So you spend a lot of time explaining, and that includes to your immediate family and even to yourself in a way, which is like, am I doing the right thing or are we helping him make the right also we were making the decisions for him. So, we were like, Okay, is this what we should be doing? But do we put this 83-year-old man through chemo and radiation when clearly it is not going to give him quality of life?
Had you had conversations with your dad before the early dementia diagnosis about what a good death looked like for him?
Culturally, very much so, Terry, we do not talk about death. Do not. And I'm not gonna, like, blanket all East Asians in this way, but culturally, there are a lot of things we do not speak about. We don't talk you don't talk about feelings, emotions, and death. I mean, I kind of knew that, well, I'd probably cremate my parents and, like, 'cause I wanted to be cremated because also my family's not religious, but we certainly never spoke of it.
I'm so interested in the exploration of you're hit with this news, but the reality of being hit with the news and then immediately having to go into decision mode. How did you have those relationships with the doctors that you asked the questions and you got the answers that you trusted yourself to make the decision?
We didn't even have a process of like doctor's appointment. He had lost quite a bit of weight and he had felt a little bit dizzy a few times. And again, I should point out that I live in Toronto and my parents live in Nova Scotia. So I don't see them that often. And then I would see him. I'm like, ooh, there's something up here. Even a few years earlier with the dementia, I was like, no, he needs a memory test. And it's challenging for my mom. One, because there's a bit of a denial. And also, when you're with the person every day for decades, you may not notice the changes or you make excuses for them. But because I hadn't seen them for almost 2 years during the pandemic, and I usually see them a few times, I went back, I was like, oh, no, there's dementia here. Also, there was a challenge because they'd had a family doctor for decades who retired. And then instead of his patients being passed on to someone else in the clinic, they were all just to fend for themselves. So my parents in their 70s and 80s were suddenly without medical care. And this is not new for a lot of people. There are a lot of people who do not have a family doctor or who are in the same situation. I think it's really dangerous when you're in that older age category because the walk-ins clinics are not going to work for you. You might have a
No.
long medical history, your medication, like all of this. So they were left on their own. So truthfully, should my dad have been diagnosed years earlier? I think so. But I can't do anything about that. They got a new family doctor. I went to the appointment, their initial intake appointment, and I think that was really key. And I said, well, he's been losing weight. It's, obviously he's got early dementia. Sometimes they go for a walk and he loses all his energy. And she's like, okay, I'm going to send him for some tests. I flew out the next day. And then I got a call from a family friend who went with my mom. And the appointment was that he had colon cancer and that it had spread severely. And it was just kind of like, there you go. Like that was it. It was a family doctor. There wasn't a radiologist. There wasn't, I don't know, other sort of expert or whatever. It was like,
There wasn't specialists down the
no,
road.
no. And I think there was a referral to an oncologist, which was going to be months, but then like he only had months to live anyway. And like in a way, you're just like, there you go. Okay.
You mentioned that your parents live in Halifax and you live in Toronto. A lot of people are in that situation of parents in another province. How did you deal with that in terms of information, in terms of keeping up to date, in terms of having to drop your life, which is busy and you have commitments to jump on a plane and go out there?
Well, I think there's like pros and cons to being self-employed, Terry, as you know. And people are like, oh, well, it must be so nice you can have all this time off. I'm like, you can have time off too if it's unpaid. So you have to understand if you are not self-employed, you can have the same time off as me. Just remember that it is always unpaid. I had the flexibility of being able to not work for chunks of time. So I basically did not work for some periods. And also some of my work I can do a little bit remotely. And I know you know this too, like it's a bit of a blessing to be able to just go, okay, you know what? These 2 weeks, I'm going over there. And so I started going back and forth, flying back and forth, just to kind of help out. And suddenly our project was just death. Like, let's make sure when he dies, like, hopefully there's no complications. He doesn't fall. Like, it's not because he has to go into the hospital because he, fell and broke something. And then, like, okay, what do you do then? All you're hoping for is like, let it be painless, as peaceful as it can be.
Was it important to you and the family to keep him at home? Was that something that you wanted to do?
It was really important to my mom. It was a non-negotiable. I really was pushing for hospice care because or like, there are some wonderful hospices that rely solely on donations. And I have a friend who volunteers at a hospice in Toronto. And, it's a caring, comfortable place because I knew or I feared that we could not care for him in those final weeks or months. Like my mom's a small woman, like she can't lift him. And it was challenging. It was non-negotiable for her. I did put us on a waiting list for hospice because, there's only like 10 beds at the Halifax hospice. And we were offered one at one point, but it was a little early for us. So I passed on it. And in the end, we didn't have any complications with my dad and he did pass at home. But I was really nervous that there would be something complicated and he'd have to go to the ER or something and then we couldn't care for him. So I was putting, all those contingency plans into place.
You're so good, you're so remarkable at laying this out for us, Pay, in terms of the experience, the step by step, the decisions you made. But I'm gonna do something now that you're gonna be mad at me for maybe. Sorry.
Probably.
Probably. Look, I said it'd be a miracle if we got through without being in tears, and look at us laughing.
Yeah, like,
Um,
so funny.
so funny.
Yeah, if you can't laugh then, oh god, you're screwed.
True, true, true. Um, this is an incredibly emotional thing. As you said, this wasn't a litany of doctor's appointments. This wasn't a situation that it was a gradual knowledge of a path that you were going down. This was horrifying news that you received over the phone. Your life is changing. Your dad's life is going to end kind of imminently. Where are you emotionally in this information and in this checklist then of what you need to do and the behavior necessary to take care of him in his final weeks, months, and days?
When I say my mom was in denial, I'll say that maybe part of me was as well, because not that we didn't believe it was happening. I would say for my mom for a bit, she really just she couldn't process it. She really thought like that maybe, which is why she entertained suggestions from like the aunties and all the well-meaning people who had been touched by cancer and who maybe had someone who, overcame. And so you hang on to that because it seems hopeful, right? Whereas I'm pretty pragmatic and realistic. And so I felt like I just need to get shit done. Like I don't think I could process too much emotionally. And maybe that was my coping mechanism.
For the record, I was like that with my dad too. Like in the beginning, my dad's trajectory was very different. But when we found out his cognitive skills were compromised and found out he'd had a few strokes, I was just like, okay, get out the lists. Like, this
Yeah.
is what we need to do. Let's take care of the situation as it presents itself.
And I also knew that if I didn't do it, no one else would. right? My mom couldn't handle it. My brother's out west. There was no one else to handle it. And I'd always been, I mean, I'm the eldest and, the parental child. And, you become the parent as your parents get older as well. So I think a part of my coping was to not prioritize emotions because it felt not productive. I needed to get shit done. And also, like, my mom's asking questions and I would just like lash out. I'm like, how the fuck am I supposed to know? I will say that I was lucky in that a friend of mine, my friend's partner, is um gerontologist, a dog like of old people.
A
And
doctor who specializes in seniors.
yes. And he was able to give me some advice. He's like, actually, the first piece of advice he gave me was get a referral for palliative care. And that was a bit of a process for me too, because
What did that mean? What does a referral to palliative care mean?
so it was so that we could have almost like a coordinator to help us navigate what would happen and also to connect us with resources. Because if I hadn't known about that, we wouldn't have had help with home care, which we had with Vaughn, Victoria Order of Nurses. Then our palliative care nurse checked in, and bless anyone who is a nurse, because those palliative care nurses have such a huge caseload. And yet, they check in. They also help with medication, because at this point we were medicating only for pain relief. And I think like maybe for a little bit of anxiety. So, but here's the thing, the whole get the referral for palliative care thing. I'm like, get it through the family doctor. So I call the family doctor and the receptionist says, you have to come in person so that you get the referral. She's booking 6 to 8 weeks out. And I said, so this was the first big hurdle that I encountered. And I said, no, 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 I need this referral. I need this referral. And she's like, well, you're looking at 6 to 8 weeks. It's like, we're not giving referrals over the phone. You have to come in, see the doctor, and then you get a referral, right? And the challenge is, this is like my parents only seen them once, like that time I went in with them. There's no relationship or anything there, right? And I remember my voice lowered. My phone voice got so low. And I said, I need you to understand, we don't have 6 to 8 weeks. I need that referral. And I'm going to call you back tomorrow and I'm going to check in on either a cancellation in the next week or if you can get me that referral. And she was like, okay, okay, okay. And when I called back, I can't remember if she called me or I called her like the next day. She said the doctor made an exception and was going to send in the referral. And the referral itself can also take a few weeks. Like, that's the thing, is like, we were supposed to wait 8 weeks to go in to get the referral. The referral can take even more weeks. He'd be dead by then, right? Like, we had no idea what we were doing or what we're supposed to do, but we did get a call and I was so relieved. Then there was like a chain of events that could only happen because we had the nurse who, this is what they do day in and day out, is they plan for people's death, right? So it was the conversation for myself and my mom. My mom couldn't really pay attention in terms of like understanding what was happening. It was a lot of forms, like the forms like choosing whether he would be hospitalized, if he would get medical care, should something happen. And so because of his early dementia, we made all those decisions for him. And I knew my dad would not want to stay in a hospital. My dad would not want an operation to fix a leg if he's only got a few months left, right? So we qualified for home care because my parents were retired. They met the income threshold for X number of hours of someone to come in and help. And that also included visits from the Victoria Order of Nurses to come in occasionally. And that would be sometimes to help with medication or things like that. That also included an occupational therapist to come into the house because we chose a home death. So that was things like a commode. We got a hospital bed in. The Red Cross, they will loan you. So we got a hospital bed with a little remote control, a walker, a commode, a wheelchair, those sorts of things. Those all came fast and furious. Teri, you have to understand how many different people I was connecting with over the phone, like physiotherapist, occupational therapist, palliative nurse, Victoria Order of Nurses, the home care coordinator, like all of this.
Is there anything in this that you feel you could have done in advance, that we need to have more accessibility or connection with this before we're in this situation? Because I mean, that's really what so much of this podcast is about, right? Is figuring out better ways, not just to die, but being prepared. Because spoiler alert, we are all going to die. And we've got to be able to do it better than this. Don't you think, Pay?
I think if you were in a situation where you're like, oh, this is a change in my physical ability or my mental ability, but you knew you had time, you could probably implement or share your wishes. But our situation was like, it was so quick that like, I didn't know like one day he could stand, the next day he couldn't stand, like that sort of thing. One day he walked to the washroom, the next day he almost fell going to the washroom. Oh, we were just bailing water, Terry. It wasn't a situation where we set it on the boat and then thought about having, a lifeboat and maybe some life preservers. We were in the boat as it was sinking, and I was just bailing water for months. Like each thing that came up, I was like, oh my God. Like I could only deal with them as they came up.
So another opportunity that we have when we invite people onto this pod to have their personal experience told, and you are the first to do so, and you're so brave, and thank you. But is really because every experience is so unique, right? And so I think that the best thing we can do as human beings is share those experiences so that people don't feel as alone. And one of the things out of everything you've already described, another thing that makes your experience so unique is that English is a second language for your parents. You were born in Taiwan, they're Taiwanese. So you're doing all this with your mom and dad. English is their second language. You live in a different province. How are we doing in that department for people in Canada where English is their second language from your experience in Nova Scotia?
In Nova Scotia, it was shit. It was absolute shit. And that's really not to blame anyone. It's, is it a super multicultural population? No, it's not, right? So are you going to find qualified people to provide the care that you need in, someone's first language? No, it's going to be harder. If you're in a big city like Toronto or Vancouver, you will have better chances of finding someone who can speak, Portuguese, Italian, Russian, Cantonese, Mandarin, Japanese, what have you. But outside of those cities, it's going to be a lot harder. And the real challenge, I will say, like, the cancer was one thing when we talk about, caring for aging family. The dementia really threw a wrench into things because you have to understand that he didn't really know what was going on. And we didn't like remind him every day, like, oh, you're dying, oh, guess what? You're dying. Like, we didn't, right? And he didn't know. Here's the thing. Teri, if you knew you couldn't move your legs, let's say you broke your legs. When you woke up in the morning, you'd be like, oh, my legs are broken. I'm not gonna, I understand. My father, every single day and several times during the day, did not know that he was no longer able to stand. He didn't have the strength. He was just skin and bones. So when he still had some strength, you would catch him in the hospital bed swinging his legs over because he wanted to use the washroom. You almost, like, I kind of joked to someone, I said, it's like keeping your eyes on a toddler because they're not stable. They're going to fall. They're going to get into something. So I'd be working at my, the dining room table, and I look over and I see him trying with all of his strength to swing his legs over. And I'm like, what are you doing? And he's like, I need to go to the washroom. And then I'd be like, I would take the walker. So this is when he could still like shuffle a little bit, but obviously it, declined. But in those moments, like he didn't know. He did not know he could not walk to the washroom, Teri. And sometimes he'd be like, what's wrong with me? Because he could see like that his hands were just like bone, right? And I'm like, well, you're just, you're not eating because he had no appetite. He lost all his appetite. So you deal with this repetition daily because that was the only reason he tried to get up was to use the washroom. Like he didn't want to use he did not want to use the commode. And just like, he didn't know.
Did you find yourself losing patience? Did you find yourself digging deep for patience? How did you cope?
I was okay with him, but I would say, like, I'd always had a little more patience with my dad than with my mom because, my mom was more of the one who raised us, right? So she was the one who was critical. She was the one that would, like, rule the household, and my dad was just there. So you kinda just have a little more patience for the one that never gave you a hard time. And, it was challenging in a way to deal with them both. Or like she really, really wanted him to eat, but he didn't have an appetite. And I'd be like, stop force feeding him. I think probably a lot of people will relate to being the parent of your parents, but kind of parenting different than the other parent. And it was also like the dementia thing was hard for my mom. Like my mom she would try to make him remember, which was really frustrating for me. Or he would remember something. He remembered his social insurance number. Like, and then she looks at me and she's like, see, well, hallelujah, but he doesn't know he has cancer. Just but he knows his social insurance number. Amazing. But I do want to actually get back to you a bit when you asked about the challenges of dealing with, family members when English isn't their first language, which is the case for a lot of people out there. It's really, really hard because there's also a lack of cultural understanding in some cases of, what this process might mean. I really needed my mother to understand. I needed her to understand the process. I needed her to understand that this was a decline that was going to end in death, not that at some point he might magically get better. So it was things like, you're just on so many waiting lists. Like I put myself on the waiting list for the Red Cross. Like as soon as I knew I could do that, again through our palliative nurse and our coordinator, like I didn't know that the Red Cross lets you borrow this equipment, like to prepare you for these. Like I didn't, how am I supposed to know? Now I know, but this is the first time I'd ever had to deal with it. And then, the Red Cross calls and says, a bed's available. It's being delivered tomorrow. And you're like, oh my God, the bed's coming tomorrow. And like, for example, my mom was like, I said, well, they also have a wheelchair available. And she's like, well, we don't need a wheelchair. He can still walk, but not for long. Right. Like, so, you know, there was that, like, it's not happening. So the pushing of having a family member that you also have to kind of convince in a way, because she's the caretaker. She's the one living in the home, dealing with it, watching it. I'm remote for the most part. I just like parachute in every once in a while. And the language thing is really hard because all these people that were coming in and out of the house, because she's just like, she's exhausted, she can't process it. I knew she wasn't absorbing anything that they were saying.
So, did you spend a lot of time on FaceTime? How were you able to keep up to date with not only what was happening within the household, but with how your mom was coping and who was impacting everything that you were trying to arrange in another province?
If there was a major appointment, I'd fly home. So things like if I knew the occupational therapist was coming in with a physiotherapist, like that first time, I was there for it, which is really helpful because it's even small things, like they had like a little lazy boy kind of chair that my dad would watch TV in, but it was too low. And like where armrests should be, how to change the height of the walker, and then we put like the railings around the toilets, like just like the smallest little things.
And who was this? Was this an occupational therapist paid?
Yeah, and this is again a resource that we were able to access through refer. Everything's a referral. Like you're just, and then like when you get the call because you're like, I don't know how long it's going to take, but we need it now. Like we needed it like the second someone said this is available, we needed it. I didn't to hear, you got to wait a couple weeks. It's like, well, we don't know. We don't have a couple of weeks. So our referrals actually came in a decent amount of time. And I mean, it's possible that because of our timeline, maybe it was flagged by our palliative nurse, like this family does not have 4 months. You know what I mean? And I dealt with all the phone calls. So all the calls for appointments came to me because it just did not benefit us to have it go to my mother. My mother, even when I speak to her on a regular basis, can't process information. So to have someone use medical words is also very challenging. If you speak English as a first language, you don't think about your choice of words to a family that is ESL. Like, even if they speak really great English, medical words are not everyday words. They may not have heard them before. Like, for example, to ask someone, when was your last bowel movement? That's a technical term. You have to say, when did you poo? And these are just like, they're small things that you don't really notice unless you're the child of immigrants and you know those two things, right? There are words like palliative. That's not a word that they would understand. They can work and live in any Canadian city and speak English very well, but palliative is not a word that comes up, right?
No.
So the choice of words, I think, again, it's those are just the medical words. And we did not have culturally appropriate resources in Nova Scotia. Granted, we got lucky in that we were able to access a translator. And again, here's another thing, like, you have to ask for these things. And we accessed a translator who spoke both Cantonese and Mandarin, and she came to the house a few times during very important meetings with the nurse, like planning death and all these things. And how are you to know that you have this available to you? Right? I'm asking. My mom would know to ask. And also, it could be cultural, could also be generational, that you don't really ask for things. But if you don't know what to ask for, you're never going to ask.
And am I hearing you correctly? Like, ask for everything. Like, if you are in this situation, ask, how do I get XYZ ABC?
I will say I was lucky because, I had a friend who was able to tell me, these are some things that you can or you should ask for.
What are some of the things that you learned about caregiving specifically?
You really, I mean, and we hear it all the time, you have to advocate for yourself. My dad's dementia diagnosis was effed up the first time because the note on the assessment was, I don't think he fully understands English. So then the final result was like, I don't think there is early dementia. And then I was like, what happened in that assessment? And it's like, oh, well, it says here that, she's unsure if he understands English. And again, you're not asking conversational questions, right? So instead of, because they didn't have the language resources, you decided this man who has dementia doesn't have dementia because you don't think he's understanding the language. And then I'm pushing, once I was there in person, saying, well, I'm sorry, but that was your final result. So that's a challenge too. And my parents come from a generation and maybe a culture where professionals are always right. So my mom said, the doctor said he doesn't have any problems with his memory. I'm like, well, he does, because he asked me 5 times where the keys are. Like, so, it's a long way of answering your question, which is, one, you have to advocate for yourself. And you really have to push, because I have always been a rather passive people pleaser. And that switched in my mid late 30s, especially with being self employed. And then, entering my 40s and having no F's to give anymore. But if you don't, no one else will. And I caution people against saying to a friend who's maybe going through this, well, you should. You know what? We're exhausted. Our brain can't process any more people telling me what I should do. So if your advice is not possibly going to lead to some sort of result. So like, Teri, okay, so you got this diagnosis. You could consider contacting XYZ. Give me a something to work with, not just an idea and not just a suggestion.
Here's the number for Red Cross.
Yes.
And maybe take the step of like actually giving somebody the phone number, not another thing that they have to do. Like, here's what I heard. I heard the Red Cross is very helpful. I looked up the number. Here you are.
Carrie, that is a great, great suggestion, because one of my friends was like, well, have you looked into hospice? I'm like, I can't right now. Like, I'm so overwhelmed. And she, bless, looked up the Halifax hospice. She wrote to the director. She did this on her own. And the woman was like, she needs to fill out these forms. She can come in for a tour, whatever. And then my girlfriend forwarded me that email, because I don't have the capacity, the energy, the brain power to, even though I know I want to get a referral for hospice, my list of things right now is calling someone with a truck to pick up a wheelchair from the Red Cross. It's also that the Victoria Order of Nurses didn't show up yesterday, so now I have to call. Like, and I'm trying to work. Like, so if you have a friend who's going through something and they're like, I don't have the capacity to make dinner, look up one of those services, send them meals if you can.
How did you, knowing that your mom was primary caregiver and she was primarily driving the agenda of having your dad die at home, how did you help, if you were able to at all, to take care of her?
I mean, I'll be honest, nobody prioritized her. Like, we just had this person in the living room who had no idea he was dying. My goal, was really like, please, can he die at home? Because my fear was, like I said, if there was a complication, that he'd have to go to the hospital. And there was no chance that my mom could handle him in the hospital. And also for him, because of his dementia, he would not know where he was. Every time he opened his eyes, it'd be very scary for my dad had never been in a hospital. Like, he'd always been rather healthy. He'd never had that stay. So that was just not what we wanted his final days to be. So my goal those months, please let nothing happen where it's an emergency. So everything that he ate, I watched. Again, we had to be careful of blockages. He had to be on a low fiber diet. I didn't know what a low fiber diet was. And again, I was lucky. I knew a wonderful registered dietitian, more as an acquaintance. And when I messaged her, it was like, we have to be on this diet and that diet. And she's like, she works with cancer patients at Sunnybrook Hospital. I didn't know that. And she just emailed me like a handout of like a general things to keep in mind. I'm like, I didn't know this. Like, I didn't know he couldn't have, apple peels. I didn't know he couldn't eat the skin of fruit. But like, Dara sent that to me and I was like, oh my gosh, okay, I can avoid, this blockage. The fear of God had been put in me. I was like, make sure he doesn't have a blockage. And I'm like, blockage, like, just, those things that seem like so kind of ridiculous in a way.
But they were satisfying what you needed, which was in your mind and your mom's mind to keep him at home.
Yes. And when you say like, did we, prioritizing her care, I just couldn't compute. Like, I tried, like I would go home and she couldn't sleep. Obviously she just pulled like a single mattress down to the living room and she slept on that, partly because he was trying to get up at night. Once he was in the hospital bed, she took a piece of, I don't know, it could have been like a dish towel or something, and she tied his ankle to the railing so that he couldn't move, or so that if he tried, she would hear him. So for months, my mother didn't sleep. You sleep on that weird high alert, kind of like you pass out from exhaustion, but she never slept. Could we have prioritized her care a bit more? Absolutely. I didn't have the capacity for it. And she never wanted to leave his side either. So even if I had tried to send her off to do something, it wouldn't have happened. We got lucky in that we qualified for certain hours of home care. Here's another thing. I suggested this to someone on Instagram that I know as an acquaintance whose father is not well. And I said, based on your parents' income, if they're not working, they may qualify for home care. You wouldn't know that, right? Because it's expensive. Otherwise, we got to choose who we hired and we paid them directly and then we were reimbursed. And that was because home care in English is not going to help us. This was us in Nova Scotia. You could get home care provided by like an agency. So like, let's say, a nurse or a personal support worker to come in and help. Or in some cases like ours, which was really helpful for parents whose first language is not English, was that we could hire personally someone, like anyone, to do, let's say it was like 12 hours a week. And that person could just come to help cook meals. That person could come to help wash, whatever. So at first we had a woman my parents have known for years who used to work with them at the farmer's market as a cook. She would come and she'd cook. She'd cook mostly for my mom because my mom was the only one who could eat anything. My dad was not really eating, but it also provided companionship for my mom in first language. And it was someone she knew. And then we got a referral through someone, though we're not religious, there, church groups, are pretty great. And someone from the Chinese church had said, there's a new family that moved in, and there are a lot of people who have nursing qualifications in Canada who don't necessarily qualify now for their job, right? So they may work in a completely different field, but in their home country have some level of support work or, nursing
Nursing.
care. So we actually were able, through a referral from someone who knew someone at a church, find a wonderful woman whose background was nursing in Hong Kong and who could come in and who was really helpful, hands-on, like, you just cleaning, like, I mean, I don't really wanna clean someone else, right? And we found another gentleman whose family, I believe in Hong Kong as well, had run or owned perhaps private seniors care center. Like, he didn't have any sort of certified background, but he had spent a lot of time, almost as a PSW, caring for, elderly people in different stages of life, and they just became family. Like, "Oh, okay, Walter's here, Linda's here." They'd walk in, they could speak to my dad. That's the other thing with the dementia, right? You need someone to, like, speak to him, engage with him.
And take some of that, like all of that is, and I don't want to use the word burden because people are not a burden to us. But what I'm suggesting is to have those other people around takes those moments that your mom could go and have a shower or brush her teeth, that there's somebody else there, that you could, go and take a call outside with a friend or something to do with your work and somebody else was there with him. All of that can what possibly allow for a home death, which I do think many, many people believe they would prefer and want for their family member.
Yeah, absolutely. And when you think about it, it's like it seems super challenging, right? You're like, well, do you just fall asleep one day? And, we don't know the process that leads up to it. The days that lead up to it are actually, and I'll say this if people aren't aware, they're really not good. You know when it's coming, based on how they physically deteriorate, like he couldn't speak. The final few days they were not good. They were very, very bad. They're very, very bad to witness and to be present in. And I had one person, actually, the lawyer who did their power of attorney stuff, said to me that both her parents had passed of cancer. And she said, I need you to know that it's not good at the end. And I'm like, okay. Because I just, you don't really think about the physical change, which is very hard to see, right? Like, you'd think maybe Terry, like, you're like, oh, I'm just going to go to sleep and I'll not wake up, but I'll pass nicely. It's like in my situation and what this woman had said to me, she goes, they can go without food and water for a very long time, and you just wait for them to like starve or dehydrate to death. And so I hate even saying that because it sounds so awful. But when she said that to me, I was like, okay, yeah, well, that makes sense.
Right.
Because at some point you can no longer eat, you can no longer swallow. So then you stop drinking. And she told me that her father lasted like 7 days from his last sip of water. And so that was just torturous. And so then I'm like, all along, all I was doing was planning for the uncomplicated death, right? I'm like, "Oh boy, that's just gonna be bad."
With all that trauma that you witnessed, that your mom witnessed, that your dad was going through, combined with knowing you didn't want him in a hospital because he would have not known where he was with his dementia and it would have been so upsetting to your mom. Hindsight being what it is, was keeping him at home and figuring out his medication to keep him as comfortable as possible, was that still the right decision, or would hospice have been that in between?
I do think, being at home was the best. I'm gonna say because of our situation and because of my dad's memory, it was probably the best for my mom. So, because in those last few days when it's, like, really bad and you're not really sure he's aware, even if his eyes are open, it was as good of a situation it could be as a memory for my mom.
I'm so sorry. I am so sorry.
Well, we almost made it.
We almost made it. That was
Yeah.
you. I didn't even do it. You did it.
I'll be honest with you, I'm a huge advocate for a hospice. The situation was challenging because he couldn't make the decision for himself because of his dementia. And I think for some people, a hospice is a really lovely option because they chose it perhaps with their family. Like it's a nice environment, that sort of thing. The reason I wanted to consider a hospice if we needed it is because my mother could not physically move my father. And even the two of us, though he was shrunk down to skin and bones, it's dead weight. So, near the end, we had a catheter put in, but also just at the very end. Before that, we had him in Depends, right? And he was honestly, it was a challenge to get him to use the washroom because again, if you knew you couldn't use your legs and I was like, "Terry, you gotta be in Depends for a week," you're like, "Okay, fine. When I need to go, then I'll go." He couldn't do it. Like, he didn't want to do it because he didn't also know that he couldn't stand.
Yeah.
Every single time he wanted to use the washroom, he wanted to get up, and we're like, "No, you're fine because, you're covered." It's the same as, like, how your body wakes you up in the middle of the night when you need to pee. You won't just pee in your bed,
Right.
right? It's not the position that is natural for you. So even just him having a pee a few times a day was this constant battle of like, no, no, no. Like, and so we would, obviously do just like a little bathing every day. Rolling him over, the two of us was like, it was hard. Like, so that's why I thought the hospice would have been an option for us is like just someone to help physically care for him because even with just my mom and myself, moving him was a challenge. And that's where our home care help was great because Walter was a bigger man. He could come in and he would come and he would clean my dad and dress my dad change his clothes every morning. You know what I mean? And that just took that off my mom.
How do you think we can better prepare ourselves for the caregiving role that many of us will face?
I think, you can have those conversations. I think it's easier said than done for some people because I haven't even really, talked about it with my mom. I'm fully aware of what she wants for herself is what she wanted for him. I think if you have some sort of idea that it's going to happen, and that would be like getting a diagnosis of some sort that there's a physical or mental decline that you start thinking about what you might need. And I would say also, if you do decide that you would like to stay at home, looking into the physical items that will help you out. Cause I didn't think about that. I mean, I'd never even seen a commode before that. I didn't know I could adjust the legs. I didn't know there's so many types of walkers, like, all of those things. So you can start thinking ahead about that, knowing that you don't have to buy them either. You can find ways to, there's so many organizations and, charities. And again, I go back to community groups or churches, I think, which could be really helpful, but also helpful as a support. And it all will depend on your financial state too, right? Like we're pretty, lucky. I could not work for a while, but for some people that's not an option or distance makes it really challenging. And I think it's easy to say that you could make this checklist of like, well, when this happens, I'm going to da 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 da. Da. But then like you don't know when you're going to be thrown into it, how much advance notice you get.
And pay, honestly, that is what this is all about, is recognizing that I think that we all have an idea that we'll have a checklist or we'll behave in a certain way or we'll do this or we'll do that. And the fact is, every situation is incredibly unique. And all that we want to do here is open up those conversations so that if somebody is looking for a resource and they listen to you and they're like, Red Cross, I didn't know about the Red Cross.
Mm.
And that could make such a difference for somebody in this. Thank you so much. I know that this was a big ask. One of the things that I love that you wrote about your dad on Instagram was to remember how he lived, not how he died. And we talked a lot about his death in this conversation. Is there anything you'd like to mention about how your dad lived?
My parents were vendors at the farmers market for decades. Unlike other people's, family perhaps, they had the unique position of meeting a lot of people through the decades, as customers, having watched people grow up. Like they had customers who brought their children to the market when that customer used to be a child at the market. You know what I mean? So they saw generations of people. And when my dad passed, the outpouring was like from the community was really, really lovely from the market customers. It was people sharing stories of how much my parents had helped them. And my parents they really struggled. Like we didn't have a lot of money growing up. They weren't more financially comfortable until they were empty nesters, to be honest. So they worked a lot. And I never had a lot, but they gave a lot. So, from people of, how my mom would slip them extra food if they didn't have the money to pay for it, how she would send other workers at the farmer's market home with food and, it's really like fed the community. And I think it was nice to know that like my dad had such a legacy of being extremely generous. And so many people remembered him for that and who still remember him for that. Like I'll see vendors sometimes at the market when I'm there and, they share stories about him, memories. And I think that, that was also nice in the aftermath of it all, right? Because it happened. It happened in the best way that it could have happened in a way. And, Teri, we're both people who like to plan. And even though those last few days were like not amazing, they were not good days, I was like, okay, we did it. There was this feeling of we did it.
Yeah, you did.
He was able to die at home and not in too much pain. Again, that last week is challenging on many fronts because you don't want someone to suffer. You don't want to see them in pain. You don't want to see them scared. And you know what? You do see them in all of those stages. And you're just like, please don't make this last too long, right? And we didn't have a complication. He didn't have to go to the hospital. He didn't have to be hooked up to anything. And we did that. So, that's what I spent months just trying to get to, really. And then there's everything afterwards, which is a whole other story.
Which is a whole other story. But this is the story that we told today. And you were so great and so generous. And thank you so much. I would say I'm sorry I asked, but I just know so much that this is going to be so informative for people. And you are the first person I asked to be on this podcast. And I just thank you so, so much.
No, you're welcome, Teri.
Thanks for listening to this episode of The Heart of It All, a podcast about navigating the realities of caregiving. The podcast was created, executive produced, and is hosted by me, Teri Hart. Co-executive produced by Carrie, Hayden, and Jess Carroll of 6 of 1 Digital. Music provided by Riverside. Follow us on Instagram, Facebook, TikTok, and YouTube at The Heart of It All Pod. And let us know, do you have a caregiving story? What would you like to hear about on The Heart of It All? You can find Pay's contact information in our show notes. If you like the podcast, please subscribe and share this episode with someone who you think could benefit from these conversations. Also, consider giving us a review on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. And please, always take care.